Today we're working on lying on your CV. Welcome to Working On It, the podcast that helps you navigate the complexities of the modern workplace. I'm Lauren Spearman, brand consultant and advocate for care, transparency and flexibility in the workplace.
And I'm Molly Johnson-Jones, CEO of Flexer. Lauren and I are here to provide you with practical advice, insightful discussion and expert guidance on how to thrive in your career.
In this episode, we're tackling a controversial but important topic, lying on your CV. We'll explore why people do it, the potential consequences, and how to present yourself effectively without resorting to dishonesty.
How employers verify information and share some strategies for addressing gaps and weaknesses in your career history, honestly and positively.
Quick thanks to our sponsor, more on them later. I'm very interested for this episode because I am an absolute goody two-shoes and I wouldn't dream of lying on my CV.
Have you never lied a tiny bit on your CV?
No.
Not even...
I don't really use my CV anymore, but when I knew we were discussing this, I went through and I was like, is there anything where I've tarted it up a bit? And I was like, no, it's
not good. Even you took 2 months between jobs and you wove them together?
No, I don't think so.
Nothing?
No. This is alien territory, but actually lying on your CV is more common than we think, right?
It's really common. About 32% of people in the UK admit to having lied on their CV. And that's admitting to it. They're probably lying about lying on their CV.
I wonder how many of that 32% have then got caught, or actually how much have got away with it. But yeah. What are most people like when people are lying? What are the most common lies that they're sharing?
Well, we both asked our audiences, didn't we? And my favourite one. So I posted on LinkedIn and asked people if they'd ever lied on their CV. And I used my example, which was ridiculous. It was a lie to absolutely no end. I lied that I could speak French. I said that I could speak conversational French. And it had been on my CV since I was 18 when I actually could speak conversational French. And then I was interviewing at a French company when I was 23. And halfway through the interview, the one person asked me a question in French and I was like, sorry, I don't speak French. And they're like, oh, you put conversational at the bottom of your CV. I was like...
You're like, no, I mean, where I can ask where the train station is.
Yeah, and I was like, où est la bibliothèque? And they looked at me and no, I did actually get the job, but it was incredibly embarrassing where I had to be like, I'm sorry, the very bottom segment of my CV I haven't updated in a really long time. And it made me look like a completely nonsensical pathological liar because I wasn't applying for a French speaking role. It was just there.
And it's not even, it wasn't even about your experience you were lying about. It was something that was just that extra bit at the end that,
and that's what one of my favourite comments when I asked my audience was a guy lied, just completely lied about playing the saxophone because he didn't have any hobbies.
Do you think that's definitely a thing in our earlier careers where it's you feel like you need to pad out a page, so you just put your interests and
So he put saxophone and then the guy interviewing him played the saxophone and started asking him about what kind of saxophone he had, what kind of music he played.
A gold one.
And he was he was like, a big one?
Very loud.
I like jazz.
But actually, I guess one of the more common things is probably things is obviously experience, but also job titles and what they did within that and their achievements, right?
Exactly. I think that's probably the most common. It's really important to say at the beginning of all of this, lying on your CV is never a good idea, but there is a difference between lying and embellishing the truth a little bit.
Yeah.
Because if you're lying on your CV, you're saying, oh, I have experience in X, Y, Z, and that's what then leads you to get the job, you're either going to be found out at some point, or you're going to end up in a role that you can't perform and it will stress you out and make you even more unhappy than job hunting or not having a job did. It's not worth it.
Someone commented on a post that I made where I was asking for people's experiences lying on their CV, and they lied and said that actually they had GCSE maths and they got the grade C grade, and actually they only achieved D. And she commented something like she's actually worked in finance for 20 years, so it didn't, she's obviously got away with it. But I guess those kind of things, is that really important?
GCSEs, that does feel like a ridiculous requirement to have as an adult job.
Yes, especially if you've got experience to back up, that becomes less important. There was another comment someone made where I think she said she had embellished some of her experience, but she's like, after the age of 26, people think you're a grown up and they kind of don't care about that stuff.
Yeah, I think the scrutiny of the CV is definitely more present in the maybe first 5 years of your career, and after that it becomes much more about what your last role was. And also people look at LinkedIn more and more as well, rather than actually looking at detailed CVs.
Apart from maybe trying to show in your early career that you can really do something or prove that you're eligible for the next role that maybe you're going into, why do you think people lie on their CV?
I think sometimes it's because there will be things that they know potentially are a red flag. Like the small lies, like I mentioned, of say someone took 3 months to find another job after they were made redundant or whatever, and then maybe moving that last job as finishing a bit later, because people might see that gap as a red flag. Or the same with, if somebody did get 3Ds at A-level or something and then inflating that slightly. I feel like there are small changes that people will make to make sure that they're not a red flag. And that's super common. And that's what a lot of people said when they were saying about lying on their CV when I asked.
One of the things that we discussed off camera, I was saying how one of my biggest frustrations is a lot of roles that say they require someone to have had a degree to be able to do the job. Do they? And would that be the worst thing if someone said they do, just because it's this pointless tick box exercise?
I think it depends on the job, right? If it's like you need a PhD in mechanical engineering, and you don't have that, and then you build a bridge, like
yes, of
concerning.
Course. It's objective. But actually, I work in marketing, and yes, a marketing degree is fabulous, and that, but actually, that doesn't. There's so many roles. I often argue, like, do you really need that degree, or what's it going to do? Like, I have a degree. Is it in any way linked to the work that I do? Not at all.
But then it is lying about that.
Yes,
the right thing to do, or is it better to say I don't have a degree, but actually I spent those 3 years doing X, Y, Z, which gives me more experience than somebody that's at the university and learned theory.
But I wonder if, because so many people now are applying for roles where it's like you've got to beat the ATS and it's all keyword checked, and actually
that's actually
for that.
Slightly a load of bollocks, yeah.
Okay, tell me more on that.
So when people are like, you can't put your CV in PDF, it has to be Word because the ATS is going to read it and spit it out. Like, yes, there is some truth in the sense of like keyword checking, but that it's more to make sure that it's like the country that you're in, or get rid of spam applications or people that have no relevant experience at all. Is it going to know whether you've got a degree from here or here? Absolutely not. The level of information that is actually taken out during an ATS screening is quite low.
Okay. Although not technically something you put on your CV, you were just explaining to me that actually you can see where people are lying about their salary history. Now, whether you questioning someone's current salary, I think is a big no-no anyway.
Yeah, agreed.
But tell us how employers can find out if you were lying about that salary.
So, and I completely agree with you. I think asking previous salary is a company red flag. Asking about salary expectations, I think, is quite different. And often candidates will come and they'll say, well, I was on 80k a year and I'm taking a big pay cut for this opportunity. And you give them the job and you negotiate the salary. And then the first month that you pay them, you can see what they were previously paid, largely, give or take, on their P45. So although they'll still have got the job and it won't have affected how you got the job, it doesn't stand you in the best stead or depict you in the best light if it's very obvious that you were lying about your previous salary.
Which actually is so obvious because, of course, that information's going to be on there.
It's a tax,
and I don't know why I've never clocked that before.
Don't do it.
It's definitely not a reason to lie, but also you shouldn't be asked in the first place. So that's karma.
Although you've not lied on your CV, you're a pretty empathetic person. So why do you think people lie on their CVs?
I guess, especially at the moment, the current market is so competitive. So I had someone comment when I asked about this question to my audience, and they said, I haven't necessarily lied, but I've embellished because I know that I can do that. I'm sure all of us have been in roles where we have seen someone else, maybe our boss demonstrate that we've seen them go through the process.
Yeah.
So we believe that we can do it. So there is an act of that embellishment on there.
Yeah.
I have definitely weirdly been at the other end of someone taking my experience and using it.
What? How did you find out?
They launched their own business and said this is their experience, and that kind of took what was on their CV and turned it into this is about us. Wow. And I was like, that they weren't even in the same team. I did that. I sat at my dining table and I did that work.
That's crazy.
And that damn right lie, I just found like it's shocking. And I think to the point earlier, like I pride myself on being very honest and transparent, and the shock that someone could do that.
Yeah.
And I called that out, and I, messaged that person and said, it's really interesting to see that experience, given that it was my job and I did that.
Yeah. But that's the danger of lying, right? It's not just that the person that you've told the lie to finds you out.
Yeah, your then reputation becomes tarnished, because that person now is kind of known as someone that is lying. And why would you want to work with someone that
no matter what the lie is, exactly, no matter what the lie is, being caught in any lie makes you look bad, even if it's about playing the saxophone.
Yes, yeah.
Of course, it doesn't affect your ability to do the job, no. But you look at
because
best
if you're going to lie
foolish.
about something small like that, then
you can lie about anything. Slippery slope.
But I do think there is an element of trying to beat the competition, right? You've got to be the one that stands out. So if you can, show off impressive numbers or tweak them slightly, I can see why people would do that.
Do you not think with all of this that there's a lot of overemphasis on the CV as a thing? Because very often when companies are hiring and you talk about knowing that you can do a job and believing that you should be given this opportunity, kind of that's what interviews are for, to talk about those things. Same with your LinkedIn profile, like showcasing work that you've done before. A CV is sort of like a first hurdle. So it feels like there's less need to lie about certain achievements and certain things if you have the opportunity to talk about it in an interview anyway.
I guess there's a two-part here, because one, there's a whole other conversation about, is a CV just a very outdated way of applying for a job anyway, especially when the stats around actually networking is, still one of the biggest ways in which people find work. But I also think that, yes, you're right, it's further down the line, but it's getting to that interview stage, I think is probably why people do feel the need that actually they need to embellish in some way to even get to that stage, because it is so competitive.
Because when we hire at Flexa, the CV obviously matters in terms of being able to ascertain whether or not somebody has the ability to do the job, right? You're not going to hire a data scientist into a social media role or vice versa. But we do like short screening questions of like, why do you have the skills for this role? And what's interesting when people fill, it's like we don't expect more than like a few sentences, but what's interesting when people do fill those questions out, that's where they start to weave in a lot more of the sort of anecdotal experience and maybe having learnt something outside of a role and brought it in. So as much as I think cover letters get a really bad rep because they're appalling, and why
I love a cover letter.
You love cover letters?
Oh yeah. I mean,
it's a whole different one.
There's a whole other stuff that I enjoy more, but I do love a cover letter.
But I like the shorter screening questions where like you don't have had to have created this, you haven't had to create a formal like letter expressing your interest, but it's saying like, why do you want this? Like, why are you a good fit? Why are you excited by a mission? Not, why does my company stand out to you? And that's what we tend to judge people on. As long as the CV's fine, it's the questions that will then mean we bring them to a short interview, and then it's sort of like step up from there.
And again, because that's bringing in the humanity, right? And I guess that's the whole argument for why maybe CVs aren't necessarily the best way to recruit anyway, because
you don't know if someone's a good addition.
Yeah, you can get so much more from those questions, where they can explain, why they're maybe coming from a different industry, or maybe why they want to go into this role that's different from what they're doing now.
Exactly.
I wonder if there's also an element of everyone else is probably lying, so I might as well.
Yeah, like if you can't beat them, join them.
Yeah.
But then I think, again, that's such a slippery slope, because even though, with the stats we were looking at, even though only 32% of people in the UK admit to lying on their CV, 85% of employers say that they've caught applicants lying.
I wonder what are the consequences then of if you have been caught lying? Is it like, they lied about the saxophone, not the biggest deal or whatever, we'll get over it? Or is it something that actually you may have gone and actually employed that person and they haven't got the qualifications, or they haven't got actually a clearance in something, or, whatever that could be to actually do the job?
I'd say there are different stages that you can get caught in a lie. There's immediately when you're asked about whether you can speak French, or there's at referencing point, because it depends on the company you're applying to, but like big corporates will have like proper referencing software where it's like a soft credit check that can check where you've previously been employed, how long for, And that is all information that is held and accessible.
But actually, that's on with references, though. That is pretty much all you really get now from an employer is confirming. And a couple of weeks ago, this is going somewhere. A couple of weeks ago, I was clearing out my grandparents' loft. They were like, basically before they died, they're like, get it all out now, then you haven't got to worry about it. So that's nice and morbid. But
Jesus.
One thing that we found was these letters from my great granddad of references where it was an actual reference.
Yeah,
and
like a written reference.
It was talking about his work, and my grandparents were like, that's how you got the work. You took that letter to the next employer to share with them. Whereas now references are just confirming they worked here in this position from this time to this time.
Yeah. So that's where lying about job title or tenure is quite risky.
Yeah.
Because it can literally be flagged up at any point.
Yes.
And I think those probably are some of the most common lies, is how long you worked somewhere, particularly if there are career gaps. And people inflating titles is incredibly common as well.
The reason people might inflate titles or actually deflate titles, because if you have been, say, a head of marketing in a very small startup of 4 people, you are then not going to go to a huge, big, like FTSE 100 company or whatever,
That's
and
totally
probably be applying for a head of marketing role, because what you've been doing is very different. So I can see why people would maybe switch it down to feel like they're not going to be sifted out straight away for going, oh, they're probably too experienced or whatever.
It's funny because that feels like a less bad lie.
Yeah, it feels
even
like,
though it's a lie.
It feels like you're just trying to have some self-awareness. Right?
Yeah,
rather
because it's true. Like not managing a team but being a head of is completely different to managing 100 people as a true head of marketing, whatever it might be.
I sometimes get in my DMs of people go, I know that I'm working at this job, but my company said that they can't give me the title because then I'd expect more money. So they're working at that level. So I guess they believe that they can potentially call themselves that when they're applying for jobs, because they believe that they are already working at that level.
I think that's where it gets quite murky, right? Because people might tell you one thing, or their manager might have said that to them when actually their performance wouldn't justify a pay rise. So it's hard to make that decision entirely yourself and really be sure that that's the case, because it might not be.
Maybe people do it so that they can get to interview stage.
Yeah.
Is that the right approach to then have to then backtrack a little bit?
Yeah, if you've got 4 interviews and you've got to go try and explain your experience as a head of or whatever role you're in, the likelihood of you being tripped up is quite high versus saying, I've been at this level for a while, I wanted the progression opportunity but it wasn't available. I believe that I've got all of the skills that you've listed and that I would be great in this role. Like, I feel it's much better to explain your way into a role rather than explain your way out of a lie.
Yes. And actually that pressure you're then putting yourself under to kind of live that lie almost. It's a hell of a lot of stress that you could do without. And yes, it may mean that you are not shortlisted for certain roles that you know that you could probably do with your eyes closed. Yeah. But do you want to start off on that foot? Probably not.
No, exactly. And if it might be that it's slightly more difficult to find that dream step up in a role, but at least you've done it honestly.
Should we go to a quick ad break?
Absolutely.
Fed up with being catfished? I'm not talking about your love life. I'm talking about being catfished at work. Showing up expecting an amazing culture, great vibes, and instead finding micro fish and micromanagers. But how can you really tell what it's like to work somewhere before you show up on day one? The Work Index is like having a friend on the inside, giving you all the info you need about a company before you accept an offer or spend hours and hours applying. There are 20,000 companies on the Work Index with info on culture, benefits, promotion, progression, and management style. Go check it out now at theindex.work.
Coming up, we're going to discuss ethical grey areas in CV writing. But first of all, let's explore a real life scenario from a listener. So we've got a story from one of your followers.
Someone slid into my DMs. It's the kind of sexy stuff I see. Okay, so this is from Anonymous. They said they've been working as a marketing assistant for 2 years, but has always dreamed of being a graphic designer. When a junior designer position opened at my company, I embellished my CV, claiming I had freelance design experience. I got the job, but I'm now struggling to keep up, and I'm constantly worried about being exposed. The stress is overwhelming. How do I handle this situation? Should I come clean to my boss or try to quickly upskill to match my claimed experience?
Just leave. Why did you need to lie about that?
Oh no.
Why didn't you just design some things first?
That's such a horrible, stressy position to be in. My first thought was you wouldn't have been given that job if they didn't believe that you had the design skills, because I'm surely that would have been demonstrated. I'm also questioning, has it been vocalized to them that they're struggling? or is it an internal feeling?
I love how you go in, think on the side of the person, like, oh, maybe they're just misunderstanding it. And I'm like, fuck are they doing?
No, but I think because we are often our own worst critic, and has their employer voiced that there are concerns with their skills?
That's a fair point.
And there's a skill gap. Or is it that actually they have realised that the job is a lot bigger than they were
If you're
expecting
struggling
to
to
be?
keep up, though, rather than just the stress, like struggling to keep up,
Yeah.
that does sound concerning.
Then
But I'm confused by...
And it's the same business. So they have been a marketing assistant in that business and then have moved into the junior designer role.
Yeah. Could have been that they were really good as a marketing assistant and then they were given that chance without necessarily having the experience to back it up. But I definitely would have done some design work on the outside.
I mean, I have definitely been given projects before where I think people assumed I had maybe experience in it and I hadn't. Not because I've lied, but maybe
just assumptions,
come across so great. But actually, I think my biggest thing I've ever done in one situation in particular I can think of is I rang a couple of friends that did those roles and was like, can you help me?
Yeah.
And try to get myself up to scratch as quick as possible so that I had the confidence in my own ability. And again, I was given this opportunity, so it wasn't like I'd kind of lied to get there. But I do think my kind of advice would be to try and upskill. They said at the end, should I try and quickly upskill to match my claimed experience? And I would say that I think that would be a right approach, because it doesn't sound like yet they have been pulled into an office or whatever on a call to say, we've noticed this.
True.
And what can you do to prevent that in the first place?
But do they want to keep doing this job, I guess, is a question they need to ask themselves as well.
Good question, yeah.
I've always dreamed of being a graphic designer, actually, and now that dream's a reality.
Yeah.
Is it a nightmare?
Yeah.
Because if it is that, then I'd probably be tempted to leave and go back to find a different role at a different company.
Yeah, I think so. My dream when I was younger was to be a patient, and I don't really recommend that.
A patient?
Yeah, I want to be a patient.
What's a patient?
Like in a hospital.
Wait, would you just lie in a hospital bed?
Yes, because like I wanted to lie in bed and I wanted to be bought food. And
that's a lazy girl job.
I'm not gonna lie, I still think it's quite appealing. But so just because you've dreamed of it doesn't necessarily mean it's right. Like,
yeah, exactly.
That's a really fair question to go, is it what you expected it to be?
I would feel like if I'd lied that badly, I would just leave.
You're so harsh.
No, I'm saying me. I would just leave. I'd be mortified. I'd be like, I can't continue this charade. I have to get out.
But it might be that generally you can see that they will enjoy it, but there is the gap. The first time I ever headed up a team, I spent the first few months panicking, going, oh my God, because I hadn't done this before.
You felt out of your depth.
Yeah, and actually I had a coach who was amazing, and she said, write down all the things that are on your mind. And is it because you are completely incompetent, or is it just because you don't have the experience yet? And is it because you're new?
Yeah.
And I was like, so much of it was just, I was new to the business. It was a new industry, a new role. It was setting up a new team. It was just newness.
Yeah.
And I wonder how much of that is playing into this here. Is it that they are struggling to keep up?
Truly.
Yeah. And actually, is there something that they could vocalise and say, oh, is it the workload that they're struggling with, or is it the actual work?
Yeah. I think that's a really fair point, if it's perceived struggle or reality. But if it is that they literally don't have the skills to be able to do it at that level, I think it's quite a difficult lie to unpick, because you can't go, no, I've never been exposed to any of this kind of stuff before. I'm really struggling.
I think the beauty of realising this quite early on, you're only 6 months in. And I think if you've got this far 6 months in, it would have been flagged by now if they were early signs that they kind of didn't think you were doing it. But I think you've also got enough time to maybe speak to other people in your network, or, whether it's an online course or something that can support your experience, that can actually plug that experience and confidence gap.
I think coming clean risks the reputational damage side. I think it's either that, they need to assess whether it is just upskilling and that it's very new and naturally there's some things to learn, or whether it is the case that it was a bad lie and they probably won't be able to repair their own reputation in that company.
I'm just thinking, if I was their boss and they came to me and said, I'm actually feeling like, even though I've got this experience, which I haven't, even though I've been doing this for 6 months, and maybe that's how you position it, I've been doing this for 6 months, but I do feel like, I'd like some assessment on how I'm doing, and is there areas that I need to upskill in? And you kind of,
use
if
that as
someone
an
came to me
objective
with
view.
that, I wouldn't necessarily go, oh, it's because they're lying. I'd go, actually, that's because they are conscientious and want to do a really great job.
That's a good way of handling it. Better than my runaway. What do you think the worst lie you could tell on your CV is?
I mean, surely it's got to be job title or your actual experience. But I have a thought on this. Some businesses have internal and external job titles.
Yeah.
So if you gave someone your internal one, we were discussing earlier when a reference check, and they come back and that business says they were this, that could feel messy because it's not, you're not lying.
Yeah.
You've had to pick one or the other, right?
Yeah, I guess so. I suppose it would be whatever was on your contract is probably what you should say you were.
Yeah.
Because that's what will then be flagged. But there's a huge risk if the other bits that will be flagged are around like professional qualifications, because I think the worst thing that you could do is say you have like a regulated qualification.
Yes, of course.
Like whether that's an accounting qualification, because some companies, they'll have to have a registered accountant in order to be able to do accounts and audits legally. So with lawyers, you can't lie that you're a qualified lawyer. So there was a mad story a while back of somebody kind of not disclosing that they'd been disbarred as a lawyer and carried on practicing.
I wonder if people do that because they can sometimes get away with it because
it's not checked.
Checks,
yeah.
Which is shocking, but the impact that could potentially have on the business is so damaging, which is why you should do the checks in the first place.
And I think it's something that small businesses are more likely to fall prey to because you don't have the resources or sometimes the need to do those checks. And I remember when we were looking for our third co-founder, like technical co-founder, we spoke to quite a few different people. And honestly, some of the people that we spoke to about joining us had never coded anything. They just fancied the idea of being a technical co-founder. They were like, oh yeah, I know what a website should look like.
Wow.
But on their CV, they were like, I am like a qualified CTO, which is mental. But I think because it was such a small startup, they were like, oh, it's just going to be easy. They won't know what they're looking for. They're not going to check.
What about qualifications in terms of like things like degrees? So if someone's not finished their degree, I know we touched on it earlier. It definitely, my voice has just gone really sexy then. Someone sent me a message saying, because so many places ask for a degree, they put that, they have a degree. They didn't finish the degree, but they did go to university.
And I feel like that's one of those lies that is potentially forgivable if it gets found out. Like, I personally don't think you should lie about having a degree if you don't or hadn't finished it and you didn't end up with the certification. But there are some lies that are probably forgivable and there are some lies that absolutely aren't.
I think a forgivable one for me is definitely the kind of slightly tweaking of dates.
Yeah, that's
what you mentioned earlier, because I think people do it because they feel like they will be judged if they've had a month or 2 or 3 or 4 or whatever out of work. I guess in my experience when I was job searching last year, technically I have a gap on my CV. What the reality was,
that gap didn't matter.
No, and I think, but I can see why people would lie and cover up a gap because the perception is, there must be a reason why.
Yeah.
But in my experience of having a gap of a couple of months, no employer even asked about that.
And I think sometimes lying is through fear without actually knowing that it's a problem.
Yes.
And I think there's a lot of sensationalism around career gaps, around, being at a role for 5 years and not being promoted. There's a lot of this sort of scaremongering and sensationalism of like, no, that's a massive red flag. No, you can't possibly have that. Whereas in reality, to your point, often those things are not that big a deal. If you've got a good career history, if you've come across well in an interview, you've written a brilliant cover letter or screening questions, they're your biggest opportunities, not slightly tweaking things.
No, I think also sometimes people might admit a role if they were only a couple of months, maybe they got redundant or something. They just might take that off their CV completely. Do I think that's an issue? No, not at all. I can see why they might have done it, or actually it's a business that they left very quickly because it just wasn't right and they don't want it on their CV.
Yeah, exactly. It might be that if you went in for a month, realised that it absolutely wasn't what you thought it was going to be. Company catfishing, that could be another episode, being sold a job that is absolutely not what you then experience, and then leaving and you can just wipe it off your CV. I don't think there's a problem with that.
No, and also I think the more you progress in your career, like for example, I've worked in sales and marketing for years, but my first ever job out of uni was working at the National Blood Service as a PA. And quite quickly after I kind of got into advertising sales, I took that off my CV because I didn't feel like it was as relevant. So I can see why people would leave things out.
That aren't relevant, absolutely. And also, it is shrewd and it is smart to tailor your CV depending on the certain type of role you're applying to. Obviously, you can't be applying to a product manager role and a financial analyst role. Like, they're two completely different jobs, but often with different companies and different roles you're applying to, there will be different nuances of what the role is and how your experience will tailor to it. And you don't want a CV that's more than 2 pages. So it can be quite smart to sort of finesse it so that it properly fits the job description truthfully, but leaving bits out that are maybe less relevant, maybe going into more detail on things that are relevant.
Especially when your CV is to show off the best of you and show off your ability. So I can see what there is, that kind of balance between embellishing and actually it's just self-promotion and knowing you can do that.
So you can't lie on your CV, but you can curate your CV.
Molly, we have covered a lot today. I guess the biggest takeaway is you may have been one of the 1 in 3 that have lied on their CV, but you don't always have to be. And I think there's hopefully a lot that we've covered that shows the benefits of being fairly honest and transparent in your experience.
Curate, don't inflate.
I think that wraps up our episode on lying on your CV. Ultimately, honesty is the best policy.
Always. A little bit of embellishment around the edges, I think we've decided is okay, but nothing where you can be caught in a line. Definitely don't pretend you play the signs.
If you have any questions or have your own confessions to make, please do reach out to us on Instagram or TikTok at workingonit.pod or email us hello@workingonit.show.
Tell us lies, tell us sweet CV lies. Next time on the podcast, we're talking about workplace icks.
Oh, amazing. I
have so many.
I just felt weirdly too excited then. Thank you for listening and we'll see you next time. Until then, keep working on it.